Friends, I think we're going to begin now. Thank you very much for joining us for our quarterly webinar. And actually, this begins our 6th year of webinar programming. So thanks again for joining us this evening. And we are delighted to be joined by several friends for tonight's conversation. Two of our dear neighbors, Victoria and Tim, who were recently at Standing Rock, are going to be speaking with us. And then also our dear friend, Bob Two Bulls, is calling in from somewhere in South Dakota near his reservation Red Shirt. And so he is going to also be with us. Thank you to Victoria, Tim, and Bob for joining us. But before we begin this conversation, we will begin by once again commemorating the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which falls midway through the season of Advent each year, and on December 12th, which was yesterday. If you want to review the meaning of Guadalupe's story and symbolism and how it is grounded in several biblical traditions, I commend our recorded webinar of 2 years ago, in which we connect her to the image of women clothed with the sun in John's Revelation. Then it looks at how this story, in turn, remembering older biblical narratives such as the birth of Moses in Exodus and the birth of Jesus in Matthew, which is the gospel reading for the first Sunday after Christmas this year. So please check that out if you're interested. But for now, we just want to take a moment Sorry, hang on. There we go. To acknowledge this great tradition, which celebrates the Epiphany of Mary a half millennium ago in Mexico. Our Lady of Guadalupe is the patroness of indigenous peasants displaced by Spanish colonization in Mexico and the U.S. Southwest. Her feast day is one of the keystone events of Advent, and we who are non-Catholic have much to learn about this liberating tradition. If you want to learn more, a popular informative book on this historical, cultural, and political tradition is Virgil Elizondo's Guadalupe, Mother of the New Creation. Relevant to our topic tonight is the fact that in the traditional account, Mary appeared in a vision to the dispossessed and demoralized indigenous peasant Juan Diego on a sacred hill just 10 years after the Spanish conquest of Aztec Mexico. And she assured him that the God of the Christians actually stood with the poor and not with the conquistadores. And Guadalupe has represented a counter-narrative to the long and lamentable story of colonization in the Americas ever since. Pictured here is the traditional image that miraculously appeared on the tilma of Juan Diego when he went to testify to the Archbishop of Mexico City about his vision. It represents a text rich in both Christian and indigenous symbolism, and it's worth taking a minute to point out characteristics that may not be familiar. The aura or luminous light surrounding Guadalupe represents divine power, and the rays of the sun would have been recognized by the Aztecs as a symbol of their highest god, Huitzilopochtli. The lady is standing upon the moon, which for the Mesoamericans was the god of the night. So both archetypes of light and darkness are represented. The eyes of Guadalupe look down with compassion, a contrast to aggressive Aztec iconography in which the gods typically stare straight ahead with their eyes wide open. For the Aztecs, only royalty would be carried on the shoulders of someone, and here an angel supports Guadalupe. Her mantle is blue-green or turquoise, to Aztecs the color of the gods and of the natural forces of life and fecundity. And some believe that the stars on her mantle represent the constellation that would have appeared before dawn on the morning of December 12th, 1531. Indeed, in the older church calendar, this was the time of the winter solstice. The color of her dress is rose or pale red, perhaps representing the color of dawn or symbolizing the beginning of a new era. And the girdle or the bow around her waist appears to be a 4-petaled flower, which to Aztecs represented the Nahui Olin, the flower of the sun, a symbol of abundance. And the high position of the bow and the slight swelling of the abdomen shows that the lady is with child. There's so much more to this story. For now, however, we just want to acknowledge this iconography as both Christian and indigenous. No wonder the great farm worker advocate and nonviolent activist Cesar Chavez never marched for justice without some image of La Guadalupana accompanying him. It's also important to note, as is discussed at length in our 2013 recorded webinar, how Guadalupe's iconography is connected with the vision of Revelation 12. There, a woman is pictured struggling to protect life in the face of a beast who threatens violence. The image of Guadalupe corresponds closely with John the Revelator's vision in this way. The woman is clothed with the sun. The moon is under her feet. On her head a crown of 12 stars, and she is pregnant, indeed in the agony of giving birth. This woman confronts a great red dragon, taking a stance of nonviolent resistance in the face of the powers of death. The dragon is one of many master symbols used by the apocalyptic writer John of Patmos, who was a political prisoner of Rome in the late 1st century of the Common Era. In Revelation, the dragon stands for the lethal violence of empire, and the woman as the protector of life. Interestingly, the struggle at Standing Rock often is described in indigenous imagery as a battle with a black snake, symbolizing the oil pipeline and the corporate powers behind it. And as one native artist reminds us, it is women at Standing Rock, too, who are battling before the snake, calling themselves not protesters, but protectors. And that brings us to our topic tonight, the ongoing resistance at Standing Rock, which is a very fitting way to honor the feast of Guadalupe. The genealogy of the action at Standing Rock can be seen in work to stop the Keystone Pipeline on one hand, and the Idle No More movement that several years ago began to coalesce activist energy among Canadian and U.S. Indigenous peoples. Idle No More was founded by 4 women in Saskatoon, one of whom was one of our speakers at our recent October Bartimaeus Institute in Saskatoon. Sylvia McAdams is pictured here, the second one from the right, and she was a fabulous person that was a part of our institute. Now I'm going to turn the time over to Ched and the rest of the speakers.
Thanks, Elaine. Sure. Beautiful. Thank you, Elaine, and thanks everybody for joining us. We got a good crew from all over Turtle Island tonight. I know there's been a high level of interest. And to hear about this struggle at Standing Rock, and we're going to hear from three different very dear friends who have in recent weeks been with folks there at Standing Rock to get their first-hand accounts. Let's just begin with just a little bit of general background, however. At Standing Rock, an encampment was established in spring of this year along the north bank of the Cannonball River, where it flows into the Missouri River on reservation land of the Standing Rock Nation of the Lakota Sioux, and also privately held land that is also traditional territory on the south bank. The site was chosen because it was very nearly in the path of the North Dakota Access Pipeline of the Enbridge Oil Consortium, which is projected to cross under the Missouri River right at this point. Crossing point had been moved, however, 60 miles south of Bismarck. You see Bismarck there in the center of the map, after residents and officials determined that the risks to the water of that predominantly white community would be at risk by the original planned crossing just north of the city. The redirection of the pipeline meant that it would, and now has, crossed large stretches of historically occupied Sioux territory, including a path that ripped right through burial grounds and ceremonial regions. The goal of the campaign in the present has obviously been to stop the construction of the pipeline on this pathway. Over the last 9 months, an ever-growing population of supporters and resistors, including our three friends, has learned about not only the issue of the pipeline, but the failures of permitting processes and consultations with treaty-protected Native people. Those gathered at the 4 connected camps on either shore of the Cannonball River refer to themselves, as Elaine already noted, as water protectors. They're engaged in actively building a movement of resistance to the pipeline and to similar corporate practices of fossil fuel companies across the country and around the world. The aims of the movement include a growing cohesive community, an educated community, one that is trained in and committed to active nonviolent resistance. It has also come to serve as a moment of two really important things, one being the reestablishment of solidarity and support and cooperation among more than 300 discrete Native nations on one hand, and on the other, an amazing opportunity to educate a global non-Indian population about the history, belief, practices, and culture of Native folk. So without further ado, I want to have time to just talk with Bob and Tim and Victoria. Bob has been very patiently standing by. He is in or near his home territory in western South Dakota. I believe he made a recent visit to the camp over the weekend. Bob Tubals, who many of you know from our institutes and from Word and World, is the Director of Native Ministries for the Episcopal Church in Minnesota. So he's very deeply involved. As a Lakota person, he's been watching very closely events. So Bob, let me start with a question that I'm going to ask to each of our three guests, and that is if you would take a minute to describe when and how long you were at the camp there at Standing Rock, and what led you to go there.
Well, we were unable to make it this over the weekend because of the weather. We were driving up toward that direction, but it was pretty bad at that point, so we decided not to take the chance to drive up in there. I mean, it was blowing snow sideways, sub-zero. So we'll try it again at some other point. So right now we're down on the Pine Ridge Reservation. So last time I was there was back the beginning of November, end of October, was when all the clergy and pastors and other religious leaders had gathered, and that was a call out by one of our priests who's on the ground on Standing Rock, John Floberg. He was hoping to get 100 Episcopal priests, but then over 500 people showed up from all over the country, and it was a day of prayer and peaceful presence.
Right. So
and that's kind of and that's what brought me out there. And plus, my dad, who's also a priest, he wanted to go out there, so that's we all went out there.
Yeah, and I know this time around you were hoping to take your son Grant, which would have meant 3 generations of two bulls there at Standing Rock. That would have been pretty cool. Bob, you're very familiar with Indian country, both in the Dakotas and Minnesota, with current conditions and the long history. What is it about Standing Rock that most draws you, both as a person of faith and also really as someone who lives on the prairies there, as a native person? Your tribe is from similar area there close by. So what compels you to go and see what's happening there?
Yeah, well, so as a student of history, especially federal Indian policy, that in itself really drew me in at the beginning. Back in end of the summer, one of my son's friends had just come back from there, and so they were telling us about the encampment and how the 7 bands of Lakota have been coming together. It was the first time in 100 years that this happened, and so that really piqued my interest. And then as I sort of dove in a little more deeper, I started to ask questions for myself, like what is it with the pipeline itself? The Missouri River has a long history of where the government built reservoirs, stuff like that, displaced people. There's a history there around that. So just the interest, and then getting into a little further and realizing that this is more than just this isn't just about what's happening with the pipeline. It's all about water, and that's going to be what we'll eventually be fighting over. Maybe not in my time, but maybe my grandkids' time, or even my son's time. So that's concern. And as the more I think about it, and how many people it'll affect downstream, it's a tremendous amount of people. And even it'll affect the water that eventually gets piped to my tribe, the Oglalas. We all rely on that water source from Missouri. So it affects a lot of people, not just Indian people. And I think it's wrong to paint it as an Indian white thing. So it's just looking at
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I think that's to paint it that way is just the wrong thing. We have to look at it all the way around.
Yeah.
See what it'll affect.
That said, it certainly is the case, though, that there's a long history of what is termed these days environmental racism. That is sort of asking Native people and tribal territories to oftentimes bear a disproportionate impact of industrial development, oil infrastructure, and also the potential hazards and risks that goes with that infrastructure. And that's something that's not at all new to the Sioux Nation. Resource extraction has a long history of being something that has been a very real threat to your sovereignty.
Yeah. I think, in the past, I heard, one side saying that, well, how come the tribe didn't say anything about the electrical lines that went in back in the 80s, and then some other line would want, cut across the reservation, et cetera, et cetera. And, kind of thought about that. Someone was like, well, I think the tribes are a lot more savvy now. We have people who are, professionals who are in law, who are, on the issues all the time. And so things like this can't just, get past us anymore like they used to be,
Yeah.
So
But
I think, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just saying, I think things have changed now, so it's going to be a whole new day here as far as that goes. And I see this gathering here of the tribes. It's really a really great thing, and it's not just by bringing everybody together. That in itself is historical, and where do we go from at this point? As far as like coming together and really rallying around an issue that affects everyone. It'll just be interesting to see what happens in the future here. Not just with the pipeline, but just other things.
Yeah, it certainly has been a catalyst. Not only for environmental activists from all over North America and beyond, but really for tribal groups around Turtle Island who are really responding to this, and not responding to it in order to be an activist tourist, but because they realize that the kinds of issues that Standing Rock is facing are the kind of issues that they're facing back home, whether they're Cherokee from Oklahoma, or folks from the southeast, or from the southwest, Navajo. This is a common story. Did you have a chance when you were there in November to talk with many different tribal folk and get a sense of what they were feeling in terms of this experiment in intertribal solidarity?
No, I didn't get a chance to really talk to that many people as much as I'd like to. That was my primary purpose to go up there this past weekend. To really, there's some questions I have that I'd like to see if some of them could be answered. So I think it'd just be interesting to see what people say, not only the people who are coming in from other places, but I'd like to know what some of the tribal members on Standing Rock have to say. That's it's a voice I'm not really hearing right now.
Yeah. Bob, I hope you're not getting buried in snowdrifts as you're pulled over at a good reception point on the road. We really appreciate you joining us in the midst of that blizzard that y'all are dealing with there. But I do have one more question to ask you. Tim and Victoria and you all have been there within the last 5 weeks, and each of you were there during very significant times, sort of highlights of that time. And for you, one of those highlights was the clergy presence that you were part of, where, as you said, there were something like 500 clergy representatives from all over the country. Do you want to just describe a little bit of that? As I understand it, there was a big circle and some official apologies on part of some of the clergy representatives denouncing the doctrine of discovery and some other kinds of rituals that happened. What were the highlights of that gathering for you?
Well, Well, yeah, I think just gather down and near the bridge, and then listening to different people speak. My dad was among them, and it was just a real powerful thing. The presence there, and of course the circle. I thought was really amazing thing to sort of just unfold like that. And I think right now, I think it would, I've just been thinking of like from a more theological point of view, and right now, I just need to sit down and ponder it and start writing about it more.
Yeah, I'm hoping you do get a chance to do that, as you know, because you have a really unique perspective on all of this as a Native minister. What was your sense of the what people are remarking on a lot, and what we're going to hear from both Tim and Victoria some, was the real sense of prayerfulness and spiritual presence there at the camp, led by elders. And do you feel like there was a good rapprochement between all the clergy and some of the traditional folks at the camp? Was that well received in your opinion?
Yeah, overall, there was maybe one or two individuals who had a problem, but there wasn't like anything that just sort of disrupted or anything like that. Generally, it just was like I said, a peaceful gathering, because it wasn't just people that were from the Christian tradition, but there was some Buddhist monk there, and a few other people, Wiccan, so it wasn't just the Christian leadership that were there for that particular gathering.
I'm so glad that you were able to be there, and John Floberg has done a magnificent job organizing there. I know you've talked to him recently. How is he feeling right now more than a month after that clergy presence? Of course, he's still there in Cannonball as a minister. How's he feeling about the situation there at present?
Well, yeah, last time I talked to him, he just seemed, really tired, but at the same time, just sort of really just getting a lot out of this whole experience for himself. I think he's, of course, it's one of those things that, not every clergy is going to experience in their ministry, and what he's probably is the Episcopal priest, he's just know that the Episcopal Church as an institution really is there on the ground and really helping out, and that's, hasn't happened in a very long time.
Yeah, that's certainly something that you can be proud of about your church, is that not only present on the ground, but some very strong statements by your bishop and by the church. So that's been great. One last question, Bob. You minister there in Minneapolis at All Saints Church there, which is an Indian mission, and you see a lot of the folks, the very large population of urban Indians that are in the Twin Cities. How are they perceiving what's going on at Standing Rock? What, in conversations you've had with folks there in the Twin Cities, particularly Native people, how are they feeling? Are they feeling encouraged by it? Are their spirits lifted by that presence?
Yeah, it really is. Like there's people going out there all the time, it seems. So, just about every other day I hear about somebody who's going out there. So, people are able to participate by, making donations in terms of food items and stuff like that. And we had a couple rallies that were against, our sheriff's department had sent some deputies there. Early on, there was about, I think they had 39 total that went there to, be the law enforcement presence there. And so we had a rally in front of the courthouse, sheriff's department, and then there was another one in St. Paul, and a lot of people showed up. Lots of different people, not the usual folks you will see at some of the demonstrations and rallies like that, but just a whole different set, it seemed. And I think that had a great impact on the sheriff's department, to where a couple of days later, he called them back, and his thing he said was their job was done there. But I think the rally itself had a huge impact on that decision.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, Bob, we really appreciate you pulling over by the side of the road there to talk with us. Thanks for taking the time out. I promised I'd let you go so you don't freeze to death out there on the roads. How's the weather there at the moment?
Well, it's there's some snow flurries right now. I mean, when we drove down, we were up in sort of northern South Dakota, near the North Dakota border, and it was bad, and I just, really feel for the people who are, standing ground there, and these are some extreme conditions, and I know people know how to survive in that, so, but there are others who don't, and there was some Sami people coming in from Norway. As far as I know, they're there now. I have to check on it. They're just going to show people how to survive in that kind of extreme weather.
That's great. That's good news. Well, Bob, thanks so much for patching in to be with us. We very much appreciate it, and we'll let you go. Thanks so much.
All right, man. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Bob.
Peace.
You bet. Bye-bye.
All right, so that was Bob Two-Bowls, the Director of Native Ministries for the Diocese of Minnesota, Episcopal, who was at Standing Rock in November. So that's kind of the first chapter of our eyewitness report. Sitting all the way to my right, but I think on your screen your left, is Tim Nafziger. And so I'm going to now switch gears and ask Tim to talk a little bit about his experience there. But I want to start with the same question, Tim, to you. Tell us when were you there, how long were you there, and what drew you?
Yeah, so I arrived around noon on November 20 and left early on the morning a week later of Sunday, November 27. And I was there wearing my Christian Peacemaker Team's hat, which I brought along, as that's just to be part of an ongoing presence there. Yeah, there you go. Good close up. Wearing the colors, I guess. So there was an invitation that went out a month and a half ago now from Christian Peacemaker Team's Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Project, saying we have an invitation. They sent an exploratory group there for a weekend in early September, I believe, and it took a while to organize things, but about a week and a half before I got there, the first reservist did a stint, and then I took over from John Bergen, who you can actually see in the photo there with the red hat, and Cody Hirsch, two CPT reservists, and then handed over to two others. And so that's what drew me there, is the opportunity not just to show up, but to be part of a continuing presence and an organization that I'm deeply connected with.
Right. Of course, CPT has a history now of trying to stand with Indigenous people in various parts of the world. So that was a really great thing for you all to show up. Let's just rewind for a minute Tim's got some photos to show about sort of 3 moments that really stuck out for him while he was there. But give us just your sense, because we shouldn't assume that everybody on the call has the kind of broader political background. What is the issue, and why has this presence changed the landscape of this of this infrastructure development?
Yeah, well, Chet, I think you covered the basics in those last 2 slides, which is really helpful. There's a couple of ways into the question you just asked. One of the ones that I've been thinking a lot about is some parallels with Rosa Parks. You know, when we learn that story of Rosa Parks in school, sometimes it's presented as, oh, it just happened. And it's really important when we're talking about Standing Rock to recognize the decades of work that have gone into building this movement. And one example of that is the Indigenous Peoples Power Project, which is connected with the Ruckus Society, which was part of the Seattle protests and doing, you know, banner drops, those kind of things. And the Indigenous Peoples Power Project has been doing trainings with Indigenous people for over 15 years. So they might be parallel to the Highlander Center, for those of you who are familiar with the civil rights story. There's also movements like the tar sands blockading that was doing radical tree sits a couple of years ago, less high profile than Standing Rock. But right now, and continuing, is the Mississippi Rising and other radical blockading along other parts of the route. And you also see the nation just covered Texas town that's fighting another Enbridge Energy Transfer Partners pipeline in Mexico that's only now beginning to do direct action. So what you see is many different communities. And we also, it's worth pointing out the parallels with the movement in Pennsylvania and other places against fracking that have really brought together unusual partners. I think it's also really important to frame this movement. I'm thinking of author Kelly Hayes, who I worked with in Chicago many years ago, who's really emphasized that whenever we talk about this, it's important, as we've already done on this webinar, to make the connections with 400 years of resistance by Indigenous people to colonization, and really seeing this movement as part of that struggle. That's a broader context. I could say more about specifics, but that's what came to mind for me.
So you were, during the time you were there were sort of 3 moments that you have documented in your photographs. Do you want to walk us through those?
Yeah. Does the arrow button work over here? Yeah. So as I said, I got there on November 20. Oops. And was, John Bergen gave me a really nice orientation to a Seti Shikoan, which I'll talk about more later. I was doing some Facebook work, and John and Cody had both really plugged in well to the legal collective. And I might talk more later about how well organized a Seti Shikoan especially is in terms of different collectives doing different roles. And the role of the legal collective is not only lawyers there, but also legal observers who have documented or trained to document different actions. And so John was sitting in there on the afternoon of Sunday, November 20, and someone came in and said, we're doing an action on the bridge in 30 minutes and we need legal observers. And that's often about the notice that's given because of the security culture that's there, because it's clear that the camp is heavily infiltrated. And so usually, I'll talk more about this in the action on Thursday on Thanksgiving, but you just show up knowing that you'll find out once you're there what's happening. So John and I walked down to the bridge together, and we actually were there. That earlier photo I was showing was us just sitting there, and that gives you a sense of the 2 trucks that are sitting there at the end of the bridge that the police moved there as part of their blockade of Route 1806. And there's been a lot of frustration about this blockade because it makes it hard for residents of the Standing Rock Reservation to get to Bismarck, which is where the hospitals they need to get to are. And so...
And this is a public highway.
It's a public highway.
That security is blockading.
Yep, and it's a combination of the National Guard and the police. The land that you see across the bridge there is land now owned by Energy Transfer Partners, But that only happened around the beginning of September. I didn't understand this fully until I got there, but I'm just taking a little bit of background here. September 3, which is an incident many of you will remember, that was kind of the first time Standing Rock came into a lot of people's consciousness with the dogs, was kind of an immediate response of finally finding out the path of the pipeline, which goes through the land that you see on the far side of the bridge. Amy Goodman was there and documented that. But that was, at that point, was still owned by a rancher who the tribe actually offered to buy the land from, but instead he sold it to Energy Transfer Partners. So then you have the 1851 camp that was there in October and cleared by police, which brings us, and so the land across the bridge has basically been no access to any protesters, enforced by a combination of private security, G4S, which we did a protest here in Ventura County about, the county sheriffs and National Guard. So that's all context to this moment. The semi is backing across the bridge in this photo at 5 o'clock, and it was immediately clear that their goal is to pull one of those trucks off of there. This happened, this first tear gas canister, which you see rolling down the hill, happened just minutes after they were attached chains there, and had begun pulling one of the rest of the trucks back across the bridge. This is an important photo because one of the claims by the police is that they were trying to put out fires with the fire hoses that have been set by water protectors. But if you see the path of that tear gas canister rolling down, I have more documentation of this in a video that I can't really show right now, but you can see then that catches fire. And that's the first major fire that happens there. You can see John in the middle of the bridge talking to people, and the semi is still trying to tie on to things. But at this point, at the very beginning, there was like 10 people there when they first fired tear gas and started the first fire. And I think it's important to explain that because the police have this narrative of protesters escalating, but it was what I witnessed was police escalating very dramatically. So this is 523. I have this slide in here because you can see the silhouette of a police officer actually putting out the fire, which is a reminder that even before the water hoses got there, they had the fire extinguisher equipment they needed and were able to put out that one fire. And then you can see more and more people beginning to gather. And in many ways, they were gathering in response to the police repression, the police violence, and in support of the semi. And you can actually see the outline of the rusted truck being pulled off the bridge here. And then you can see the traces of the tear gas shells being fired at the water protectors. And this is at 5:45. I don't know if you can make it out, but you can see one of the rusted trucks actually being successfully pulled off the bridge just 45 minutes after things started. And if you read the accounts by folks like the Washington Post, they'll often say, oh, things started up at 6 o'clock. And that timeline really distorts the picture of what's going on in many ways, and the escalation by the police. Here you see another tear gas canister landing to the right of the photo, and in the next photo you'll see another fire started by the police there. And again, it's just important. Both of these photos show just the blatant lies of the police in claiming that these fires were started by water protectors. This is a picture of John there as it's getting colder. The temperature is about 28 degrees Fahrenheit that reached a low of that night. And that's an important context for the next photo, which shows 6:53 when they first brought out these water hoses, which are allegedly, or they claim to put out the fires, but we just witnessed them spraying down water protectors all over the place. And that's what these next few photos show, indiscriminate.
So this is in sub-freezing temperature.
Yep. And a lot more tear gas, just huge clouds of it. And we were really fortunate, whatever you may attribute that to, whether it's a spirit or anything else, that the wind was blowing across the bridge rather than towards us, which really limited the damage that the tear gas could do. Even so, there was lots of people coming back and vomiting and having to have their eyes washed out, and there was kind of a back and forth people surging across the bridge and then coming back as the tear gas came. And this the longer shot above shows the police kind of lined up as they ended up strung out along the barbed wire they'd set up. And then it looks like it's now missing the labels, but that's fine. The big blue piece, and the SIM card is just there to give you a sense of the size. The big blue, which is almost the size of a small fist, is the rubber bullets. The big beanbag rounds are on the right there, that white octopus-looking thing. And then the two canisters are the different types of tear gas ammunition they were using. So that's a short run through, but that's what I saw on the bridge.
And that would represent in many ways one of the most dramatic confrontations. Got a lot of press, as well as a lot of distortion in terms of the narrative. And that happened early on when you got there.
The very first hours after I got there. Yeah. And, I think it's also important to just name that most of what the water protectors there was just stood and took it. And I think that is that made the police lies so blatantly obvious, because lots of people were watching by, tens of thousands of people were watching by live feed. I have friends here in Ventura who were watching, and we're able to see that that's, what the police line was completely false. And the power of nonviolence in there was especially obvious. I think it's important just to name that as part of what's, been another whole another level of exposure at the national and maybe international level that came to Standing Rock in that week after.
Okay. Do you want to
just keep going? Yeah.
I'm not sure when the audio comes in. So.
Yeah, thanks. So this is just the last photo from that night, 9:38. There was 200 people treated by the medics, which was another amazing collective, both back at the camp and on the bridge there, helping people who had been shot by rubber bullets. As I understand it, one person lost their eye, one elder had a heart attack and had to be revived, and then Sophia, the woman whose arm was hit by the police claim was an improvised explosive device, but I heard a number of first-hand accounts about how the National Guard threw a flashbang at her head, and she put up her arm to lock it. And that's also consistent with the wounds from the hospital testimony. But yet the Wall Street Journal is still leading with that lie as recently as this week. So then the final picture here is just from the following day. So the aftermath of people gathered in the bridge in prayer and the police across the blockade.
So the cops put up concrete walls in place of where the truck had been.
Yeah. And this is still a very controversial police blockade of that public road. You can see also the scars on the land there as well. So I want to transition from that to talking about more broadly about Aseti-Shokoan. And I know Victoria is going to share about kind of the amazing spiritual grounding of the camp, of the 7 councils there. It can be confusing when people talk about the different camps that are there. A slide here I'll have in a minute shows where 3 of them are, and then Sacred Stone, which is the founding camp, is further back on the reservation on private land. And I actually never visited that camp, just heard about it from others. A little bit more focused on care and less activist oriented, also a little bit less indigenous leadership at the Sacred Stone camp. So this is the sunrise after the morning on the 21st, the day after the bridge, which was one of really catching our breath. This map that Chad got off the internet is really useful in being able to see. To the south is actually the Rosebud camp, where it's actually on reservation land. You can see the line running through, the dotted line demarcates the reservation land from land claimed by the Army Corps. And Rosebud is where a lot of, in some ways it functions as a bedroom community for Aseti-Shokoan, people who are less willing to camp in or concerned about camping in a place there they could be raided any time. I know that they won't likely be raided on Rosebud because they're there with the permission of the reservation. I didn't go there a lot, but I visited folks who were staying there. And then Aseti-Shokoan there. And what isn't always clear is that Red Warrior Camp is actually inside of Aseti-Shokoan. and has its own security and some of its own infrastructure. There's lots of different campsites there. One of the interesting things you'll see on the next map, first of all, I'll point out Media Hills there on the left, the big yellow blob. And when you cross the bridge from the reservation onto the land, though, there in the lower left, you get this amazing kind of panorama of the camp spread out below, which a number of folks have commented on. It's really powerful to see. And then lots of kitchens. So I'll talk a little bit more later about the California kitchen or Grandma's kitchen, or Kalamath kitchen down there in the lower left. Lots of others that feed people every day. Amazing gift economy that's happening there. The Lightning Dome in the lower right is where a lot of the big meetings happen. That was actually set up by some folks from the Red Lightning camp at Burning Man, which is a whole other interesting kind of topic of conversation. And the Sacred Fire is right at just next to the front entrance there in the center left. And that's where a lot of the gathering happens. And Victoria will be talking more, I think, about what happened there on just a week or two ago when the Army Corps of Engineer announcement happened. But this just gives you a sense of the scope of this. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chris. The green arrow pointing to the Sacred Fire. Yeah, I think that's enough kind of looking at a map. My teammate with Christian Peacemaker teams was Chi-Chuen Yuan, who has served for a number of years in Iraqi Kurdistan and is now studying at the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite. It was great to be able to work with her. You can see her on the left standing next to the Cannonball River, and on the right there's this beautiful sign with lots of nations in the distance to them. It's kind of a fun little touristy thing that people take their photo next to, and just a reminder of many connections there. And then a lot of what I did while I was there was hosting folks. This is a group from If Not Now, which is a Jewish group, 2 folks from there, and then Presbyterian Peace Fellowship that Christian Peacemaker Teams has great ties with. We also hosted and connected with some folks from the Interreligious Task Force in Latin America, Chrissy Stonebreaker Martinez, who has been to a number of the institutes here. And that was something I felt like I could do, just help people get to know the camp. We had a tent where we provided overnight housing for people who arrived too late to set up their tents, and just helping people to get connected with the energy of the camp, which is, as we've said, just an amazing experience. Another really interesting anecdote I'll just briefly tell is from French Toast and Hugs, which is a group that came in from Ojai Valley Community Church on fairly short notice, and we just helping to connect them with the California kitchen, where thanks to Patty, who's the Hoopa woman who is the key organizer for that kitchen. They came in on the Saturday morning before I left and served 500 servings of French toast, an amazing amount of fruit to 500 people who lined up, 20 or 30 deep. And it was one of those, I often think of the movie Babette's Feast, for those of you who know that. It's a beautiful moment in the camp there. And to be part of that in a little way was really cool. So then one last kind of window into the life of the camp I'll share is from the Thanksgiving action, which was prayer and ceremony on Turtle Island. And I want to paint a little bit of a picture about how actions function in the camp, with a gathering at 8 a.m. where if you want to go out to support an action that day, that's where you connect with people. Expectation that you've both gone through the camp orientation at 9 a.m. That happens every day at 9 a.m. and the direct action training that Indigenous Peoples Power Project, or IP3, which I mentioned earlier, does. And it was at that 8 a.m. gathering on Thanksgiving Day where I heard a man named his picture's on the next here. Yeah, Nates Jackson, who's from the Hoopa tribe. And I want to play this 2-minute audio from just a brief interview he did on KHSU radio, because it, for me, is just a window into the spiritual grounding. I mean, the sermon he gave was the most deeply kind of spiritual grounding for nonviolence that I've heard in my 20 years of activism and mass movements. And I think it does really echo back to the civil rights movement. I would say, like, I looked up Natez online and managed to find him, but he's not like a high-profile person. This is just a person who has been at the camp for months. He's been a firekeeper, and this is a little bit of his story.
So the late Leroy Jackson is my father. This is who I am. This is where I come from. We're here to stand in solidarity with the Lakota Sioux over water, because water is life. I know people have heard that slogan, but there's so much more inner depth that they may not quite understand. As the brother here was speaking of, the movement here, the energy here is so amazing to experience, but it's also very traumatizing, with the actions going on around us. My role at camp here is I'm the firekeeper for our medicine fire that the Hoopa people have brought over, so I pray a lot, and I guide people to a healing way, because Mother Earth here is healing her children here. This is what's being established in camp through prayer, through nonviolence. The message out there that may say we're not lining up with that, I am a witness to it. To say that's false, I disagree with it. Mother Earth, we all believe we were coming here to help her in a way, which we are. We need to stand against this black snake, the DAPL pipeline going in, But what we're receiving here, the ones that are here on ground, on these sacred lands, is they're receiving such a healing in their spirits, in their souls, their hearts. All the hurts of just coming from life in general, are being healed. The people here are walking freely in spirit, freely from colonization, freely from any hurt that was caused from anyone or even themselves. She loves us so much that it's a mother's love. She's tired of seeing her children suffer, and that's all of us across the world. And I believe, my personal belief here now is this is the beginning of the world healing of the world's children.
Amen.
And that really gives you a sense of Natez's rhythm and his conviction, and hearing it there in that dome before going out was such a powerful thing. And we ended up at the bridge where the confrontation had happened a couple of days before, just doing about 300 people gathered in a circle, and there was 2 marches that went out, and my sense is that we in many ways were just kind of a diversion as one of them going out. And we did not just a diversion, though, we also were part of this prayer and ceremony on the bridge. And meanwhile, the group, can you get me back into that? The back one, yeah. This is the group that crossed the backwater canal there, basically, or body of water onto the Turtle Island, which is owned by DAPL, and did this prayer and ceremony circle with the police. I just want to say a few more things about this action. One of the things that was really interesting for me was see the pervasiveness in drones, and of course my instinct is drones, evil, association with the killings that have happened in Afghanistan, and certainly some of the drones were controlled by police. But it's also interesting that there was a number of indigenous people who were drone operators who were documenting, and it's seen as a critical way of gathering intelligence for the water protectors to understand what's going on. And there's a number of incidences that you can see where the police are actually shooting these things down or trying to. So it's a very interesting angle on these machines that complexified things, I guess, for me. And I was, taking these pictures, intentionally framing the drones with the police in the background, because that's certainly the first place where the symbolism goes for me. But there's drones on both sides. So yeah, that's the 3 windows into my time there. Happy to answer more questions later on, but I want to leave time for Victoria. I think that's the end of my slides.
Great. We'll leave that slide up there. Thank you, Tim. We'll circle around back with some sort of what do we learn from all of this for our ongoing movement. But our nearest neighbor, Victoria Loorz, also went at, I think, relatively short notice.
Yeah.
Just a week before last, and she won the golden ticket. She got to be there when the announcement was made. But let me begin by asking the same question I asked Bob and Tim. When were you there? How long were you there? And what drew you?
I guess I'll answer what drew me first. It was I don't know, as I was watching things on Facebook, and I guess it started before then. Just I felt a longing to know what to do about the deep sadness every time I hear Elaine talk about Indigenous journey, every time I kind of tag into what's going on now, as well as within history with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. It just like I crumble, I fall apart. And I recently found out that 3 generations of my family came here to America from Ireland to fight Indians in the French Indian War. And so there were generations of people who are, oppressors. And so I feel like there was a connection there. And when the incidents were escalating, I felt that I just had this longing, like I need to be there. It's sort of irrational. I don't know what I can do. I can wash dishes. I can, help cook. It didn't really matter. I just felt like it would have been an amazing, I felt called. Mm-hmm. And so it was 2 weeks ago today, a friend who I hadn't talked to in about 5 years just messaged me on Facebook. Had seen something that I had written on somebody else's post that said, I need to be there. And he said, well, I'm leaving in 48 hours. You want to go? And I said, let me think about it. Yes. And so I was supposed to go to DC to meet with, we're part of the U.S. Climate Action Network, the organization I work with. So I changed all the tickets and we took off, at 5 a.m. within, 30 hours or something. So that's why. And we got there, we drove and got there Saturday morning, a week ago Saturday morning.
And you were taking some supplies as people have been doing?
And it was cool. Yeah, mm-hmm. People, just strangers would call and leave, bring coats and bring money and bring, more people had things to donate than we had room for, which became kind of a theme. I worked in the donation tent, and there was so much stuff. I heard they were threatening to close the post office because there was so much stuff. And they brought in 2 big moving vans just to move the stuff off the ground. And, they were like brand new 20 below zero REI sleeping bags. And so much. Americans know how to give stuff, which was also kind of beautiful. Like there were people from all over the country that wanted to be there, that wanted to support, and didn't know what else to do. But it was just like, I've never seen so much stuff. It was kind of amazing. So.
You are not only a longtime climate activist yourself, but you're very interested in the spirituality of environmental struggle. What struck you most about the spirit that you encountered at Standing Rock?
I kind of like to read this poem. I don't know if I should do it now, but it addresses that. So I think I'll just answer it with the poem.
Good.
Yeah. So it's called Lessons from Standing Rock. I wrote it on my flight out of there. Can the world be saved by love alone? By prayer? It sounds nice, a meme with a sunset in the background. But let's get real. In these days of unveiled isms, it's hardly imaginable, barely conceivable, idealistic, naive, and unrealistic. I call myself a pastor, and yet I cannot muster the hope on my own. What is real? What lasts? What matters? I drove 1,600 miles, stopping to watch the stars from underneath layers of blankets in the flat Wyoming snow, so that I could join thousands gathered to be of use, to listen, to learn, to help, to remember what it means to be human. The enthusiastic priest from the local Catholic church sits next to me on the plane home, proud of his work to provide meals for the homeless, schools for the orphans, churches for the forgotten. He repeats the mantra of his Red State congregation. He says, "There are many pipelines. Why so much fuss with this one?" As if the pre-existence of destruction justifies it, renders the damage insignificant and meaningless. A good Christian man, he describes our president-elect. I have no words. I can only wonder what he would do if one of his children he worked so hard to school shares in confession the secret of her father's rape. Would he justify it? Render the damage insignificant and meaningless? There have been many beatings and rapes. Why fuss with this one? For 2 hours I stood as they prayed at the barricade in blizzard winds, shoulder to shoulder with people who are my tribe. The Apache medicine man told us all that he adopted us, all of us, the warriors, the hippies, the tribes they once opposed, even the white eyes who betrayed them, even me. Standing in the below-zero wind chill, flags and hand warmers chanting, Miniwakoni, 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 as if the prayer itself had power to change the world. Sioux elders, Lakota and Hopi, and a reporter from Norway, burning men, and a doctor who discovered the enzyme that predicts neonatal difficulties. Housewives, priests, articulate black youth calling for revolution, nothing less. White students full of hope that they too might be arrested. Lawyers, lovers, grandmas who are always escorted to the front of the food lines. Veterans from wars that healed them from warring. I recognize as the tears piercing my eyes turn to ice, I've never felt more alive. The Apache medicine man tells us that he gave up the ways of the green frog, driven by money and television sets, when he was 27. He found happiness again, he said, when he returned to the ways of his ancestors, to the ways of the Creator. He calls me his relative. They all do. Perhaps I belong. Against what odds in these coming dark days can love prevail? Is it imaginable that a strange and intoxicating movement might be modeled by these suffering, surviving red elders? Their strategy, prayer. The organizing structure, prayer. The tactics, prayer. The call to action, prayer. The march to the barricade, prayer. The response to violence, prayer. The response to victory, prayer. The response to fear, prayer. The response to ongoing betrayal, injustice, infuriation, prayer. Is it possible to change the world by love alone? Relatives, the Apache medicine man adopted you too.
Thank you for the world debut of that poem. That's some deep stuff. The mantra of prayer. So you saw it.
I saw it. It began before dawn. They played the drum and called people before dawn to gather around the sacred fire. And it was a water ceremony. And they would pray. They would sing. The praying and singing happened all day. All day, every day, as long as the sacred fire was running. I don't think it ran all night, but then we walked with one of the most poignant pieces was walking to the river to give tobacco to the river, a gift. And it was just so beautiful. I felt so just blessed and full of gratitude, even standing there in the blizzard too, because I got to be part of the blizzard too. But to stand there and not, it was just full of joy. It was the weirdest thing. I didn't care about how cold I was. I didn't care about how much my back hurt from there's no place to sit down. It didn't matter. It was just full of aliveness, and it was absolutely one of the most profound experiences of my life. And I feel deeply grateful that I got to be there.
Yeah. So Bob Two Bowls shared about the amazing clergy presence on November 3rd, I think it was. Tim talked about the dramatic nonviolent resistance at the bridge, and then the beautiful epilogue to that on the Thanksgiving Day prayer on Turtle Island, and you were there for the December 4th Army Corps of Engineer announcement. Tell us about that.
Yeah, There were quite a few clergy there also when I was there, and they had sort of a clergy meeting on Saturday, and they were going to do an action where the clergy were going to lead march to the barricade, and as everything happens there, you just sort of remain open to what actually is going to happen, and it was changed. Chief Orville Looking Horse came on Sunday, and he sort of had a vision of this. Sort of interdenominational, multi-religious prayer march, and he changed it to a prayer circle and decided to encircle the whole camp, which was how many miles, you think, Tim?
Quite a few acres.
Acres, and so people were. There was enough people. There's probably 20,000 people there by Sunday because all the vets had come in, and so there were people surrounding the entire perimeter. And I had been working in the donation place, which was right there. And I came out and I decided just to stay there because Chief Looking Horse came out and he said, I have a big announcement. Use your cameras, take your cameras out, because usually around the sacred circle you weren't allowed to take pictures. But he said, this is a big announcement. I'm waiting for confirmation from the media and from the elders. And so I got to stand right there when he announced. In fact, I should have brought it because it's on my Facebook page. Is the video of it, where he announced that the permit that the Army Corps of Engineers denied the permit, and the whoops and hollers started up, and then I ran up to Facebook Hill, and nobody had heard about it on the whole perimeter, so it was sort of like sort of a wave of people finding out about it. Together, and then, but the most, and then I ran back down after I kind of told a few people, and one of the first elders then that caught up was a woman who said, we're going to have a powwow, celebration on Tuesday, which didn't happen because of the blizzard. But then she said, but the first thing we're going to do is tomorrow we're going to have a forgiveness ceremony. It was beautiful, and it turned into a forgiveness ceremony where the vets were able to come before the elders and tearfully ask forgiveness. It was, I actually had to miss that, but even just them talking about it, immediately their immediate response was forgiveness, and it was for them to forgive Custer and other historical oppressors. It was, I don't know, it was a restoration of what prayer means, because I think I've kind of gotten to this place where prayer is in everything, and sometimes when prayer is in everything, it kind of loses its significance. And just the intentional prayer and singing that was undergirding absolutely everything was palpable.
Yeah. That's a great jumping off point for me to invite both of you now to reflect a little bit now on having that very powerful, both of you, very powerful existential experience that I think is very representative of the kinds of experiences people are having as they go to Standing Rock. You both went as Christian activists. You both went as Christian activists who perhaps, as most of us, are maybe a little bit in retreat from some of the traditions of prayer and singing. More on the, we got to do something to change the world, and perhaps disillusioned with Christian spiritual quietism, particularly as it's practiced in more conservative circles. And if that's true for you, how much more is that true for many of the activists there who aren't grounded in spiritual traditions? And yet you go here, and here is this, as you said, the entire thing is bathed in spirit and bathed in prayer. How does that help you, inspire you to rethink your own relationship and your relationship as an activist to the disciplines of spirituality and and to prayer as a tactic of nonviolence. Let me start with you, Tim.
Yeah, I tried to write about, it's a very hard thing to write about, but I tried to do that in a piece for Christian Peacemaker Teams called The Spiritual Roots of Resistance at Standing Rock Run Deep. Because it's something that Erica Littlewolf challenged me with before I went. She said, try to sink into your heart space and get, think about the mind space, how that relates to your mind space. And in fact, it was part of the orientation there that everyone goes through, was that challenge. And it was particularly framed not just as a spiritual thing, but as a way of letting go of our whiteness and our settlerhood. And that was a challenge for me all week. Not just a challenge, but it was also an opportunity, I guess. And I think it was also a way of my body decompressing for what happened on the bridge that first day I arrived. I shared the Thursday morning piece, but another just gut level experience for me was watching this gathering of, they call themselves the Gathering of Deafitives, and they're deaf indigenous folks and they're interpreters, and they were all gathered on Facebook Hill signing to a live stream. And I just gotten done in a conversation. I just was sitting down and kind of catching my breath and watching this, and the beauty of their enthusiasm, the power of what they were doing, the connection that was evident among them, just brought me to tears. Just the beauty of it, and just sat there and wept. And those aren't moments that, especially as a man brought up in this culture, that's not something that happens every day. And that to me was one of those moments that I'll never forget, certainly. And also has to do with the power of this movement, in particular because of the rootedness in the space. At the end of, Victoria, you mentioned the forgiveness ceremony, and I shared a video of that on the BCM page on December 5, because the last words that Chief Leonard Crow Dog uses there, he says, "We don't own the land owns us," which is something that the Watershed Discipleship community has been working at for a long time, and draws, Ched's made the connections with, and the story of Naboth's Vineyard and this different relationship than the Nahala. And so to see those threads just shot through the whole space was really an affirmation that we have to, that's for me been my journey since high school, is recognizing that secular activism without the spiritual grounding doesn't cut it for me for any number of reasons. And so the camp was just a deeper affirmation of that movement and that conviction. And it'll be really interesting to see how that continues as a seed beyond Standing Rock.
Victoria, how was this moment a milestone for you? How have you been changed by being at Standing Rock?
There's something deep that's shifted. I know that. I need more time to be able to really honestly answer that. I do feel a deep need for the work with Church of the Wild that we're doing, and we're starting to connect with other Forest Church kind of people who are not only kind of connecting people with a direct experience of God and spiritual practices and formation that is grounded in direct experience of God in nature. And so we've got a bunch of other churches from all over the country that are starting to pop up that are calling themselves forest churches or Church of the Woods, and people are thinking they're the only ones doing it, but it's happening all over the country. And seeing that that's how these indigenous people have always related their spiritual practices in deep connection with our land and our water. I feel like it's affirming and it's deepening the need for this kind of spiritual connection with God through where we live and the water and the land and the people. So.
And yet Standing Rock is itself an intersectional space. There's earth spirituality, but there's also indigenous tradition and indigenous culture that is itself renewing itself. And then there's also political engagement in a real issue. Is it possible for the earth spirituality movement to realize its fullness without being in ongoing conversation with those other two? And if not, how do we do it?
I think it's all one, and I think it's easy to kind of go one extreme to the other. So I think it's bringing everybody back together, and that's not only true spiritually with activism and internal experience, but it's happening, politically. It's happening within the environmental movement. I went straight from there to this U.S. Climate Action Network. And they were having the same spiritual conversations, the same issues of, certain people are marginalized, certain organizations are marginalized, certain movements are marginalized, and this is a spiritual issue, and we need to bring it back together. So to hear it in this like hotel in D.C. with a bunch of big greens, these aren't just like little BCMs. This is, Sierra Club and Audubon and NRDC. So it's something is shifting, and I think what's happening in Standing Rock feels like the fulcrum that is shifting around.
Interesting.
Can I add to that?
Please, Tim.
I think part of what makes that possible, and I love the way your poem plays with our cynicism a little bit. And part of what makes that opening possible at Standing Rock is grounding in a 400-year tradition of resistance. And again in the orientation, and you cannot be there for very long, I'm convinced, without, as a settler, confronting white supremacy and confronting the legacy of colonization. And those things are tied together in some really deep, hard to articulate, but very powerful ways. Because I don't think, for example, earth spirituality has had the excesses of not recognizing the indigenous roots and huge problems with appropriation. But in that context, we're forced to confront those limitations, and because the indigenous community is right there, holding us accountable. And I really hope that intersectionality of the deep and embodied, hopefully, political critique of colonization can also continue to be woven with the spiritual tapestry.
Grounding in context is everything, eh?
Yeah.
Tim, a lot of veteran nonviolent practitioners have been coming to Standing Rock, including CPT, but also many others, to contribute, but also to learn. What do you think the central lesson of Standing Rock is for building an ongoing nonviolent movement?
Good question. I feel like a broken record, but it is that the tactics themselves are grounded in that service, are grounded in that, we're a pluralistic society. And so when that context and that rootedness gives an authority to Natez Jackson when he stands up and speaks, because he's speaking not just in an atomized society, but he's speaking as a Hupa person who's connected with the Lakota there. Just one more anecdote that speaks to this. I was on you talked about your experience on the plane. I was on the plane out of there. Two young men from San Francisco, one of them who was an artist, the other who white settler men about my age. And they said, I usually wake up asking myself every day, what am I going to do? But they had both been for the same week I was at Oseti Shakona, and they said every day I woke up there saying, how can I serve? And our movements, I don't think, and the ones I've been a part of, haven't done enough to touch average people. We've been in our bubbles. A great person who talks about this is Jonathan Matthew Smucker. His book is just out. Looking at hegemony, but his organization Beyond the Choir is constantly challenging activists to get outside that bubble. And I think Standing Rock has done that, has touched ordinary people because it feels it's such a common sense issue. No one wants oil when I'm drinking water. and a lot of us now know the history of indigenous oppression. So how do we build those movements that touch average people in those ways that are not dependent on a complex analysis, perhaps?
And Victoria, in the midst of all that praying, you were working, handing out clothes, and you saw that service up close.
And yes, there were. It was stressful because there was so much stuff, and it was cold, and the snow was coming in, and the veterans needed this, and they couldn't find it, and the guy that was running it was just super manic, like stressed out. But the minute anyone came in needing something, he knew what he was doing there, and he'd been there for months, so it's not like he was a newbie. And all of it was about making sure everybody was warm and had what they needed, and it was like instant. He'd be stressing out, throwing things around, and somebody would walk in and go, what do you need? What can I get for you? You need a blanket? Here's 10. I mean, it's just like this graciousness and generosity everywhere. And then somebody, everybody kind of get into like survival mode of like, okay, I got to not fall. I got to make sure I have enough, warmth. Where's the food? But somebody would like shout out, Mini Wakoni, and everyone, it was just like, there was always energy for that. Like, yeah, we're here because water is life. We're here because we love these people. I mean, you felt like this is your tribe. And it was, and there was like, these, like I mentioned, these young Black, so articulate, brilliant young people that were, want a communist revolution in our country. And then on my other side is this retired woman who's like, what's all this pronoun stuff about? That's, crazy. And they were there together. They were all, had this, nobody complained. I didn't hear anyone complaining about anything. There were an 84-year-old doctor that was standing next to me. And I don't know. I mean, maybe I didn't see it, but I did not I experienced just everyone was there to serve and find out where they were of use.
So a place and a movement, a campaign that is still largely experienced through the media around the country as one of confrontation, is in fact a space of transformation. You've both given testimony to that. Including a nonviolent confrontation with the black snake of the oil industry, but really that invitation to a deeper spirit of solidarity and service is what I'm hearing from both of you, and that's not something that many of our movements and many of our campaigns can claim. So it sounds like, in a lot of ways, this is an invitation to a turning point for how we do our work. Both as people of faith and spirit, and also people of struggle and justice. What a gift to have two close neighbors have made this trek and come back with such fine reports and analysis. And I'm sure if you go to their respective Facebook pages, there's more testimony there. But I want to be mindful of our hour drawing to a close. So let me frame this all too brief report on the amazing work at Standing Rock by coming back around to how we began. We talked about telling this story in the spirit of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so let us conclude our conversation with a sort of benediction, connecting this current resistance with the ancient stories of our tradition that have to do with resistance and with water. The Hebrew midwives who defy a murderous Pharaoh and smuggle baby Moses down the river in a basket. Moses, who is given the name that means because I was drawn out of water, a kind of a revolutionary moniker. So that's why it makes sense for these friends who have joined us tonight to stand with the water protectors at Standing Rock as an expression of your Christian faith. This is deep in our tradition, and deep calls to deep. And we're so grateful for your sharing and for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so
very,
much.
very much.
Thank you, Chad.
Just a couple of quick reminders out there, all of you friends in webinar land, and thank you for tuning in. We had a good crew tonight from all over North America. Two opportunities coming up to continue this this wrestling with what does it mean to be truly intersectional. Next year is the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's most important and most consequential speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. It's going to be the subject of our institute in February, and some of you on the webinar have already signed up. Others of you are thinking about it. You're all very welcome. We hope you can join us. Obviously, we are needing to have a bit of a family meeting to try to see what we are going to do as a radical discipleship movement in light of the new political moment, which is far colder than any of the blizzards blowing across traditional land in the Dakotas.
So can I just plug the Facebook event?
Please.
If you go to the BCM Facebook page, it's just a great way to let people know that you're coming, share it, and it's a way, as Ched said, this is kind of a family reunion. So if you share the Facebook page and RSV, the event on the BCM page, it's a way to let people know you're there going and see who else is going to be there.
Thank you, Tim, for creating that page. So we really hope you can join us, or you want to send somebody, a representative from your community. I think it's going to be a good, critical conversation, and of course a lot of practicing of service and mutual aid. See if we can build a camp of a little bit of that spirit that you two experienced. And if you can't make it, or even if you can, on April 4th, which is the anniversary of that speech, and of course also the anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, because he was assassinated exactly 1 year almost to the hour from giving that speech, will be the date of our next webinar, in which we will look at this speech, look at why it's so important, why it's so enduring and relevant, and how we can recontextualize it in our own work and space. And finally, speaking of water, we can't have a webinar and not say with delight that we are so happy that this book, long in the making, is now out. Just came out last month, and it has wonderful contributions from our young colleagues and friends around the country working on various aspects of bioregional faith and watershed discipleship. So you can get that off of our site. There's the URL at the bottom. And if nothing else, you got to buy the book because my mom's art is on the cover. And ain't it beautiful? Tim took the picture of the print that's in our living room. And Gia just made such a beautiful cover. Great book. Great resource for continuing to build a movement. And it is appropriate that this book begins with a foreword by Denise Nadeau talking about the indigenous water walking movement, which is also one of the precursors to the phenomenon at Standing Rock. One of the many ways in which Native people are leading us deeper, not only into our faith and politics, but into our humanity and into our relationship with the earth. So that's our advertisements. Again, we thank Victoria and Tim and Bob Twobolds from the road. Thanks to Chris and Elaine, working the magic in the next room. We appreciate you joining us as we commence our sixth year of doing these webinars. We need your support and need you to tell your friends what magnificent testimonies you heard tonight. This is real-time storytelling from our movement, and it is all about transformation. So we wish you a very blessed Advent and Christmastide. Thanks for joining in, and we hope we see you at the Institute or on April 4th or before. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Chad.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, everyone.